preparing to live stream. So this will be recorded, and we'll set up a link to our webpage for if you would like to share this information with other groups. We are live. There we
Rabbi,
are.
I just read a tractate from Talmud that was questioning whether you can make these decisions after drinking wine. Those important aspects of Judaism.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, you know, in the days and communities where wanting to follow Jewish tradition as best as you can are an issue, then what you would do is you would turn your question to perhaps your local rabbi, or maybe even more importantly, you might turn that, and your local rabbi might turn that over to a posek, who would then render a legal decision to which you were, obligated to follow. And so I found a number of materials, and what I'd like to do is to share that information and explore this with you as we take a look at what the great rabbis were writing about. Oops, sorry. Okay. We're talking about during the cholera pandemic. Oh, come on, stop it. One moment. Okay. We want to do that. I'm going to share my screen here for us so we can get into our text. Of course, this is our Tea on Tuesdays at 2. A little slide there for us. So opportunity to welcome everybody to our Tea on Tuesdays at 2. And again, we're going to take a look specifically at the cholera pandemic of 1848 and the decisions of one of our greatest rabbis, Rabbi Israel Salanter, and how he dealt with a particular issue that we will get into and take a look at. But first of all, what is cholera? Well, it is a disease that for the most part we have eradicated in many parts of the world. It is a bacterial infection of the lower intestines that comes from contaminated water. This contaminated water is water that is often contaminated with human feces and with other germ, bacterial carrying kinds of items. And it is a very serious disease. Even in a healthy person, it can cause death within hours, simply because of the dehydration that takes place. And so here we have some, again, in most countries, we have rendered this under control with our better sewage treatment and these kinds of things. But here we see some ads from, and newspapers, postings from France and the cholera epidemic that was sweeping through Europe at that time. Here from the New York Times, a notice, again, from the mid-1800s about being aware that there was a cholera outbreak. It was not necessarily known exactly at this time what the cause was. It was believed to have been transmitted via the air. And it was only later, as you see here in this rendering, that it was realized that it's bacteria in the water. It was bad things in the water that was causing cholera. In the mid-1800s, the cholera pandemic that we're going to be taking a look at, it's estimated that around 12 million people died on this planet during this 15-year period. Today, even today, there are anywhere from 1 to 4 million cases of cholera reported every year, and anywhere from 21 to 143,000 deaths worldwide just from cholera. And the reason that number varies so greatly is that it depends upon a number of reporting incidences and a number of technical aspects. Floods are sometimes the greatest cause of this because sewage runs into all kinds of water sources and it takes a while for that to clear out. So it is a wide range of deaths, but it's still something that's causing, that's still with us to this day. Especially in the developing countries. So what we're going to take a look at, and I am grateful to this article I found by Edward Reichman in Tradition Magazine, which is a journal of Orthodox Jewish thought. There he took a look at these rabbinic responses, which are some of the materials that I have for us to share, in addition to some of the other items that we're going to take a look at, that take a look at these rabbinic responses to how the community should act, how the community should respond when there is a pandemic. So we're going to begin with Rabbi Eiger here, who is in Posen, Germany. He is one of the great poseks of his day. And he is writing, again, this is before the 1848 outbreak, but this is during another cholera outbreak. And he says the following, that gathering in a small space is inappropriate, but it is possible to pray in groups, each one a very small number. Prayer should begin at first light, with the next group following thereafter. Furthermore, each group should have a designated time to come and to pray in the synagogue. And they should be careful that people beyond the aforementioned quota not push their way into the synagogue. Perhaps a guard from the police should oversee this. I found this rather intriguing, that even in Rabbi Eiger's day, he's talking about, people who would want to come into the prayer space before the allotted time, and the need to perhaps have some, official representative there to help control people. But it's interesting to note, because what are the guidelines that we are living under this very day? These same guidelines. Although it took a while for LA County to implement these, but here it is, all the way from the 19th century, that you gather in small numbers, that you have adequate space, that you allow people time to transition from one space to another, and you not overcrowd the situation. So what's old is new again. I guess, as we take a look at this. Again, this is all going to lead up. We're going to take a look at a couple commentary, at a couple of the responsa, and then we're going to deal with what is a key issue, at least for Rabbi Salanter, in 1848 with regards to the pandemic of his day and a key important Jewish ritual, which is, of course, fasting. Yom Kippur happened to be October 7th in 1848. And that is in the midst of this cholera epidemic that is broken out in Europe. By the way, it originated in India and quickly spread through Europe all the way into the United States. This is back in the mid-1800s. It's estimated that several hundred thousand died here in the States. I'm sorry, several tens of thousands died here in the States during this very same pandemic at that time. So even then, without airplane travel, this pandemic spread through Europe all the way into the United States. And so what we're going to take a look at are our Torah verses with regards to fasting on Yom Kippur. Now, we modern minds perhaps may not feel quite as obligated to this element of tradition. But at this time in the 1800s, most Jews felt that they were obligated to fulfill this particular mitzvah, especially on Yom Kippur of all the days. In Leviticus, we read that it is on this day, this Yom Kippur, that we are to deny ourselves. The Hebrew literally says, afflict your souls. And so what that comes to mean for the rabbis is fasting. You afflict your souls by denying yourself food for this period of time. And furthermore, anyone who violates this, anyone who does not fast, is excommunicated. Now, this is a serious possibility in the mid-1800s, although Jews have been emancipated by this time in most of the European countries. The rabbis still had a lot of power, and the rabbis wielded that power sometimes quite carelessly. One of our greatest thinkers, as a matter of fact, was excommunicated, and that was Baruch Spinoza. a philosopher, and his writings were fundamental in the late 1700s and in the 1700s rather, for a lot of modern thought today. So this threat of excommunication is still alive and well for the Jews who are living in the mid 1800s in Eastern Europe. And so this is a real reality. Moses ben Maimon, centuries before, had already written about this idea of fasting, that one who violates, if you observe the fast on Yom Kippur, you fulfill a positive mitzvah. Now, we understand that there are 613 mitzvot in Jewish tradition, 365 positive and 248 negative. 365 positive means there are 365 you shall do things. Observe the Shabbat, love your neighbor. Those are positive mitzvot. And 248 negative mitzvot. If we were to look at these mitzvot, we might say, well, this one actually seems like it's 3, and this other one seems like, or these 4 seem like they actually are part of one. So we might disagree with the actual number of, but the 613 is the magic number, because again, that's 365 plus 248. Well, 365, what is the other number of 365? There are 365
days in a year.
Days in the year. And so this works out to every day there is something positive, a you shall do mitzvah that I should do, just one every day. And if I do that in the course of the year, I have fulfilled all of those mitzvot. 248 were the identified parts of the human body by the rabbis. And so there's something that I should refrain from doing with every part of my body. And at the end of the year, I will have covered 613 mitzvot. But if you violate this fasting, you break both a positive and a negative. So it's kind of like a double whammy. And if you break a negative commandment, a do not do commandment, those are more, the punishment is more strictly enforced. Why? Because you were told not to do that. It's one thing to be told, observe the Sabbath day, and it's another thing to be told, do not work on Shabbat. And so you've been told not to work on Shabbat, therefore you shouldn't work on Shabbat, says, this mindset of wanting to follow the tradition as closely as possible. And if you do work on Shabbat, well, you broke something that you already knew you weren't supposed to do. And so the consequences will be a little more harsher. And so Rambam has already now implanted in minds of Jews at this time this idea that if I eat on Yom Kippur, I am violating both a positive commandment and a negative. It's like a double whammy here. So that's already firmly rooted in the minds of people. And again, at this end of our halachic evolution, we understand that you're obligated to break any of these mitzvot if doing so will save a life. And so if your life is in danger, you eat, dayenu, gesundheit, let's move on. But that attitude is a modern attitude. And it's really a modern attitude thanks to a gentleman we're about to encounter and what he did, and that is Rabbi Israel Salanter. Because let's look at what other rabbis were writing at this time, at the 1800s, with regards to fulfilling the mitzvah of fasting. So again, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, from his day, he writes the following. And again, he's dealing with a cholera outbreak in the earlier 1800s. There have been 6 major cholera outbreaks. And the one we're going to be focusing on a bit is outbreak number 3, known as the third cholera pandemic. And so Rabbi Akiva Eiger writes that the decree stipulates that as fasting on Yom Kippur is a biblical obligation, communities should not be lenient on a general basis to permit breaking the fast. So again, he is writing with a number of other rabbis with regards to instructions to the Jewish communities in the area, with regards to fasting on Yom Kippur in the midst of their pandemic. However, he writes, in order to facilitate rapid access to medical consultation, congregations should arrange for two physicians to be, or communities, should arrange for two physicians to be positioned in a centrally located facility close to all the synagogues throughout the entire day of Yom Kippur. And this council of rabbis who were writing this hastened to add that one should consult the physician for even the slightest symptoms, as there is risk not only to oneself, but to others as well. You will be called to judgment, they wrote, both for yourself, for the souls of the others you affected. Not to mention that on this holy and awesome day, one should refrain from violating the prohibition of shedding blood, of murder. And so these groups of rabbis who are giving instructions to the local synagogues are taking it one step further and saying that not only should you fast, and should people be encouraged to fast. You do not have the power to release people from this in a general way. If an individual chooses not to fast, that's one thing. But you, as rabbis of your community, do not have it in your authority to make a blanket proclamation for everyone to break the fast. Individuals can choose to do that on their own, and that's okay, but you do not have the authority to issue a blanket statement that people, you don't have to fast. Furthermore, they say you got to have doctors nearby, okay? And if you have the slightest of symptoms, you must isolate yourself. Go see these doctors, because if you do not isolate yourself, you will be held accountable. You will be called to judgment for anyone you may have infected, anyone you may have come in contact with who later becomes ill. And again, at that time, there wasn't the antibiotics we have, there wasn't the treatments we have now. It was, hopefully rehydrate through solutions and hope that, the person's body would be able to recover. And so there was great risk of death if you came down with cholera. And you would be like one who murders. I thought this was incredibly timely. The idea that individuals are going to be held accountable for the risk that they have exposed others to. Again, this is an idea prevalent in the 1800s, and as we can see today, maybe not so much so today. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger is encouraging people that this is the way you should behave during this pandemic. Still, you got to fast. Rabbi Moshe Sofer, who's known as the Khatam Sofer, writes during his pandemic, it was believed that leaving one's house without eating was considered dangerous, even life-threatening, since the danger arises only when leaving the house. If one stayed home, there'd be no danger. Therefore, the Khatam Sofer suggested that you fast at home and refrain from going to shul. Better to fulfill the mitzvah of fasting on Yom Kippur, but not to leave your home. And again, at this time, the cause of cholera was unknown. They knew it spread. They knew it spread from human beings to human beings. They did not know how it spread. The belief here was that it was from bad air, breathing bad air outside. And therefore, if you stayed in your home, which supposedly had better air, then you'd be safer. So stay home and fast. Do not go to shul. And this was his solution. But again, the emphasis is on fasting. You must fast. One of the Torah verses that the rabbis looked at, both in the Talmud and as we are about to see with Rabbi Israel Salanter, is a verse from Leviticus that says, "You shall keep my laws and my rules, by the pursuit of which you shall live. I am Adonai." You shall live. In other words, you shall live by these laws and not die by these laws. This is the origins, the biblical origins for the Jewish concept of pikuach nefesh. You must violate 610 of the 613 mitzvot. If doing so will save a life. Again, this is much more part of our modern thought because of what we're about to see. But in the mid-1800s, this was not as readily looked upon as an okay thing to do yet. Maybe in dire circumstances. But for, the ritual of fasting one day on Yom Kippur, what's it going to hurt? And yet, in our modern minds, because of the example of Rabbi Salanter, we now jump to this verse multiple times. We get this concept and would never endanger our life for the observance of mitzvot. But if we place this in its historical setting, we're talking the mid-1800s. This is still a time of great anti-Semitism. And the mere fact that you were a Jew walking around the streets of Europe at this time often left you open to attacks of both verbal and physical kind. So there was always some degree of risk that Jews had gotten used to living with. From the pogroms, from the peasants, from kings. And so, we're still in the early stages of modernity. And the concept that, all men are created equal, all women are created equal, human beings are created equal is certainly not a well ingrained thought within human society. This is the mid-1800s. Look at the problems we're having here in the 21st century. So, we can imagine what it would be like as a Jew during that time. So there were already a number of risks that Jews put themselves at simply by being Jewish. And so you may not have been so quick to jump at the idea of, well, fasting is risky, I won't do that, because it's risky being a Jew. I'm walking down the street, I could get beat up, I've got all of these things, all this anti-Semitism around me. But this is the biblical law that Judaism has understood that gives rise to the concept of pikuach nefesh. 610 of the 613. The three that you are not allowed to violate are committing murder. So in other words, someone is holding a sword at your throat and says, go kill that other person or I'm going to kill you, or is holding someone hostage and says, go kill that other person or I'm going to kill this person. You cannot kill another human being. Public idolatry. This comes about at a time in the Talmud when the rabbis are dealing with Rome and with other forcible conversions to Christianity later on. And so if it's you and Caesar and the guards are there and they're going to kill you unless you swear allegiance to Caesar and Caesar's god, whatever the god was, and it's just you do it in private. If it's public, well, the rabbis reasoned, all right, so if a single Jew is being forced to do this, then things must be really bad for Jews in general. Therefore, terribly sorry, what we need now is a martyr for the cause. And public idolatry, you are forbidden to do, even to save your life. That one, we need a martyr, unfortunately. And sexual immorality. These are the three mitzvot that you are not entitled to break, even to save a life. So this comes from this concept of pikuach nefesh, saving a life. In addition, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 16 says, Lo ta'amod al dam reacha, do not stand by the blood of your neighbor. These two verses combined give us this imperative. Now, it literally says, do not stand by the blood of your neighbor. What does that mean? There's a puddle of blood here. It's slippery. It'll stain. Don't stand there. No. Our rabbis understand that to mean is don't just stand there while your neighbor bleeds. You must do something. If you see somebody who is injured, you must do something. And this bleeding, by the way, does not necessarily have to be from a physical wound. We bleed, we are in pain in a variety of ways. And later rabbis would go to include mental anguish in this, that as a society, we are called upon to aid any human being who is suffering. And however they are suffering, do what we can to be of aid to them. So do not stand by the blood of your neighbor, and that we should live by these laws and not die by them. These are the two biblical verses that combined reinforce this concept of pikuach nefesh. Again, In modern times, we get this. But I think that's because of Rabbi Israel Salanter. He's living in Vilna, Poland at the time, and it is in the midst of the 1848 cholera pandemic. It is October 7th, 1848 rather. It is Yom Kippur, and this the legend has varied greatly. There are a number of stories of what takes place. Here is one. The rabbi stood on the bima, his dark eyes shining out from his pale face and white beard. The late morning service was almost over, and the congregation stood silently waiting to hear something from this man of God. This is the time of the sermon. On Yom Kippur morning, it is late morning. That's when the sermon comes. You've been in service since 8 o'clock in the morning. We're talking, it's noon. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. No one's going anywhere because you're fasting, and so here you are. And whoops. And they're waiting for the sermon, and this is the sermon. The shamus comes forward. The shamus is the helper, the custodian of the shul. He comes forward carrying a tray with wine and cake brought from the rabbi's home. Rabbi Salanter instructed everyone to eat and to drink, and thus ended the fast for the entire community. He violated what Rabbi Eiger had said previously, in that at a different time, you do not have the power as rabbi to end the fast for the entire community. Individuals can opt to do that themselves. You do not have the authority to end that. And here, Rabbi Salanter, who goes on to found the Musar movement, whose materials we studied during our Musar material, does exactly that. He ends the fast for the entire community. I think this is an incredible thing for this rabbi to do in 1848, given all of the precedents and the statements of everything that was in place prior to that time. I think that was wonderful. An incredible amount of chutzpah from Rabbi Salanter to do so. Rambam, we're now going to shift gears a little bit. So this then sets the stage for us moderns. And again, it was only 150 some odd years ago that this took place. But in the last 150 years, that example has become ingrained in our thought and in our processes with regards to our approach to Jewish tradition, especially outside of the Orthodox world. And that is, if I am on medication, if I am elderly, then I should not fast on Yom Kippur because that's putting myself at risk. Yes, Flo.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why he ended the fast early.
He ended the fast early because they were in the midst of this cholera pandemic. And again, the cause of the cholera was unknown, but fasting was a way of weakening the body. And he felt that we should not weaken our bodies at all, especially during this time. We need to remain robust and as healthy as we can because people are dying all around us. And so he ended the fast, having everybody eat in the congregation, even a bissela of cake and a little Kiddush wine to have some strength to continue on. So by ending the fast, he was doing this to try to save everybody's life.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Absolutely. At any time, please, if you have a question, please be sure to just shout it out or raise your hand. We have somebody here who is new to our group. I'm going to admit this person, Sharg 7 Bitota. We will welcome this individual here to our group and try to find out who this individual might be. There you are. Anyway, welcome to our recent joiner. So this then, again, having done this now, it set the pattern for us so that by the time we start thinking about this, we are much more ready to violate the fast on Yom Kippur. Sometimes some of us violate it for no reason. Others have a reason to violate. If you are, a nursing mother, if you are on medication, if you are elderly, the tradition has evolved this position that you should not fast. And here, Israel Salanter takes it one step further and says, not only that, but in times of great danger, physical danger, we are not going to fast. And he ends it, oh, it's Joe. Welcome, Joe. Glad to have you with us. We are going to end our fast here. Now, Maimonides has a few other things to say, which kind of tie into Rabbi Iger's statement about if you have the least amount of symptoms, you must seek medical attention. And not to do so is to put people at risk. And Rambam, in reflecting on the writings of the Talmud with regards to murderers, writes the following: the sages prohibited many things because they are life-threatening. And anyone who ignores their words and says, I can go ahead and endanger myself, what business is it of anyone else what I do to myself? Or I pay no attention to what the sages taught with regards to their restrictions on my freedoms. For Rambam, they are to be dragged out in the public and flogged, which was part of the punishments available to the community at this time. Rambam is writing in the 12th and 13th centuries and calling to task anyone who endangers another human being should be flogged. That this is so ingrained in Jewish thought that the idea that you would put someone else at risk for anything, especially in the 1840s when the cholera was truly incredibly contagious and very little treatment was available. Nowadays, with IV solutions and antibiotics, we can cure somebody with, even with just oral medication very quickly from cholera. But back then, no. And you often, just lost so much fluid and salts that, your heart stopped beating. This was a real threat. I learned from this article.
So Rabbi, I got a question.
Yep.
So isn't that kind of like being hypocritical? I am flogging someone. It's going to make their immune system weaker and put them at risk.
Right. I mean, we today have a better understanding of capital punishments and the lack of that as a deterrent and those kinds of things. In Maimonides' days, flogging was seen as a real deterrent. And so by writing this, what Rambam is trying to do is just to, again, stipulate this this punishment as an opportunity to help control and moderate your behavior. That this would be a real deterrent if people knew this ahead of time. That they would think to themselves, oh, wow, is it really worth this flogging? Yes, obviously beating a human being is going to put them at risk for something much more serious, especially if it's at a time of a plague. Rambam is not writing about this at a time of a plague. He's writing about this with regards to just normal situations during the course of the year. That within our Torah there are a number of obligations that we are stipulated to protect ourselves with regards to even our physical safety, but also if we're doing some construction in our house in our Talmud, you have to put a fence around that construction site. So that others don't accidentally injure themselves. And so there is a lot of stipulations in the Talmud about areas of personal safety and, more importantly, personal behavior and how you are conduct yourself. And here, if it's with regards to, I'm applying this to the time of a pandemic, that if in normal non-pandemic times, one who says, what business is it of anyone else what I do to myself or how I conduct myself if during normal times you are still obligated to make sure you don't cause harm to another individual, then all the more so during a pandemic. During a pandemic, when you have a greater chance of causing harm to another, you must even take greater care of yourself. And if you say, it's none of your business what I do, I'm going to do what I do, then this is a person who is violating not only community norms, but should be subject to some sort of punishment because they are endangering other lives.
Okay, one other question. The sages, is that referring to like laws, or is that like the rabbis? Who are the?
That's the rabbis. Yeah, that's the rabbis of our Talmud.
Oh, okay.
The Rambam in his Yad, which is the Mishnah Torah, 14 volumes, he takes the entire Talmud and tries to distill in 14 very logical volumes. The Talmud is not a logical. It's not broken up logically. Discussions are sometimes quite circuitous, and you're going to end up talking about some menu items and fashion statements before you get to the decision. What Rambam did was just go through and get the decisions and cataloged the decisions and has it in 14 different volumes. Much more, and written in biblical Hebrew so that the average Jew could access it. And this is from his collection of laws regarding murderers. And so he is summarizing the discussion and decision of the rabbis in the Talmud who taught this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. So I learned from Eichmann's articles that one of the things that Jewish communities used to do during times of pandemic, again, these were sometimes seen as an indication of bad luck, of evil spirits, of perhaps even some sort of a punishment from God. And so one of the things that Jewish communities used to do was to have plague weddings. So whenever there was a plague, they would get 2 orphans and take them into a cemetery and hold the wedding in the cemetery, and that these 2 orphans would be supported by the community for the rest of their lives in hopes of a way of averting the onslaught of the disease. And I'm sorry, this is not from Rambam. I forgot to delete the citation. And so one of the curious, perhaps more superstitious kind of things, as a way of trying to earn favor from God to end this plague, is that you would take the weakest, most vulnerable members of the society, 2 orphans, and you would hold a wedding for them, and you, the community, would support them for the rest of their lives in hopes that that would avert the onslaught of the disease. I thought that was a very curious practice.
Rabbi,
Yep.
real quick, I'm sorry. I was watching a special yesterday on Bnei Brak in Israel, and they just
Yes.
performed a black wedding about this. And I was looking at it, that's so interesting that they're
Yes.
still doing this.
Right. This was just done. When was this? It was done previously in March, I think, March or April of this year. Bnei Brak, yes, did this, held this very ceremony. I don't know if it was orphans, but they held a wedding in a cemetery to try to help avert this Corona-19 stuff. There are some mourning rituals that obviously get impacted by this. We've experienced that in modern times during this pandemic with funerals being limited to immediate family members only, or a maximum number of X, which sometimes may not have included all the immediate family members. So even today, the mourning rituals are impacted as they were back in the 1800s. Here's Rabbi Eiger again. The magnitude of one cholera pandemic is reflected in this decision of Rabbi Eiger regarding the recitation of the mourner's Kaddish. The custom of the community was that only one person would recite Kaddish at a time, and then the mourners would each rotate. So that during the course of the service, you might have 5 or 6 people reciting mourners Kaddish at different times in the service because they are presently the mourners. The death toll was so vast that each person could not even recite Kaddish once a month. And so Rabbi Iger ruled that for the Kaddish, after the Aleinu prayer, all the mourners would recite the Kaddish together. Now, this is really insightful because Rabbi Iger was a big anti-reform rabbi. Reform Judaism is just getting started. And Rabbi Iger thought that Reform Judaism was going to be not only the downfall of Judaism, but was worse than that because it was not even considered Jewish in his eyes. And yet, one of the things that Reform Judaism implemented was that all the mourners recited the Kaddish together, which is something he allowed during, a cholera pandemic. So, for his rationale, it is, look, this is an emergency situation, and because of that, we're going to do it this way. Whereas Reform Judaism said, we're going to do this because we're going to stand with the mourners, and we're all in a way mourning, and so we're going to do this together. So I thought that was rather interesting. And then from Rabbi Tenenbaum from the late 1800s, I was asked if there was an obligation to observe mourning rites in the Shulchan Aruch. It is the opinion that during a plague, no mourning rituals are to be conducted due to fright. I have set out to explain this law. It seems the intention of the law is that at a time of wrath, at a time of a plague, there are many who die. May God save us. Thus, if all the relatives of all those who have died will observe the mourning rituals, that will greatly scare the living because it will be clear that many people have died. But if there be no mourning rituals, the death won't be as apparent. One could also suggest another explanation that the mourners themselves may have fear and anxiety when they remain closed in their homes, and this may damage their health. But it is clear that the first explanation is correct. So Rabbi Tannenbaum is arguing that the reason that the Shulchan Aruch says that you should not engage in full mourning rituals when there is some sort of a plague is because doing so would call to light the sheer number of people who have died, and this will scare the living. And that we shouldn't do that. And so there we have it. Let's see, yep. Okay, and that is the end of my screen share time. That is the materials I wanted to share with us with regards to our looking at a Jewish response to a pandemic. So what we've seen is the following. First of all, there is a tremendous concern for life and for safety, and for balancing that with traditional needs. In the instance of Rabbi Iger, that you would continue to fast, observe Jewish rituals, but that the community should have readily available doctors and other medical technicians to be able to come to your aid if you develop the least bit of symptoms. And if you develop the least bit of symptoms, you need to go. You need to go and isolate yourself and seek medical attention so that you do not pass that risk off to others. All the way to the other extreme, which is at Rabbi Israel Salanter, which is no, absolutely not. In times of great distress, when there is a pandemic, when human life is at risk, we are going to not fast. We are going to follow the concept of pikuach nefesh, especially when it comes to ritual items, and we're going to end the fast, and we are going to instead, worship in every other way, except we're going to curtail some of those elements that are going to put us at risk. And so there is the focus on life and on health and on rituals, and finding a way to bring those three items together in a way that assures the most safety. Small numbers, limited numbers, rotational services, even in their day. And so I was kind of startled by the similarities between all the things that we have done today and all the things they did 150 years ago. Thoughts, comments, questions?
I have a quick question again, and I apologize
Yes.
for jumping in.
No, sorry.
Why is it, as I said, I was watching that special on the Orthodox community in Israel in COVID. And what I don't understand especially after seeing something like today, or from what I've known, why do the Orthodox have such a hard time accepting opinions that are rooted in long history? It's not new. I mean, these opinions go back of how to behave, and they still don't do it.
Right. Well, some of that is just Jewish culture. We always argue and debate. And so some of the response might be, yeah, but that was 1848. Nowadays we've got great medical technology. And with that medical technology, we should be able to follow the mitzvot because our medical technology, our God-given medical technology, will come to aid us if something should happen. Yeah, it is somewhat circuitous logic, and it is certainly not logic where you and I, would align with regards to that. But that's because our attitude to Jewish tradition is in a different alignment than theirs. Their alignment is, I must do Jewish tradition. I must do this. Even though there are those who give me permission to do otherwise, they've only given me permission to do otherwise. Like Rabbi Iger, they do not have a blanket statement that applies to me. No one gets to nullify my obligation to Jewish tradition. I must do this, or the world falls apart. And so with that motivation, those communities that are so steeped in that milieu that it's not only a matter of, well, all right, I didn't fast today. I didn't light candles before sundown. No. If you do that, the world is going to come crashing down. And so I have to do this in order to sustain the world.
What about the rabbis? What about the Orthodox rabbis protecting their communities? I mean,
right.
They don't believe in science. I mean, science is telling us that this pandemic is affecting anyone, and if you don't keep social distance, if you don't wear a mask, that you're putting yourself at risk.
Right. I cannot answer that question for them. It's a great question. I certainly do not understand it because in my mind, I believe that as a community, we owe it to every member of the community to maintain their safety at all costs. And I see that clearly coming right out of Jewish roots, right out of our tradition. They obviously do not, I do not know what it is they are seeing and why they aren't seeing the other, but I can't answer why those communities did what they did and continue to do what they do in spite of all the evidence to the contrary.
When they see everybody getting sick around them, it's not like it's happening out there, it's happening right here. And sometimes I think all these desires to do all these mitzvah is forgetting about the spirit of Judaism. But the most important theories of Judaism are being bypassed.
Sylvia, I am in agreement with you, although they would disagree. They would say that, they are fulfilling the spirit of Judaism, which says we must pray in a community of 10. And virtual presence is not valid in that world. And so we 10 have to gather, or we 20 have to gather. And so I hear you. And yes, I see in it a rationalization of their rationalizing their attitude in order to validate their behavior and their approach by selectively looking at aspects of Jewish tradition. So we're all on the same page, but they see it as part of their authentic Jewish expression. and their need. You know, this happened when there was a measles outbreak
Right.
in one of the Orthodox communities, because the Orthodox communities there did not emphasize or require you know, these inoculations that are readily available to control these measles. And so there was this tremendous outbreak. You know, again, in their mind, it was a violation of Jewish law to have that vaccine for whatever reason, even though you and I can see within Jewish law so many indications that no, they should have gotten it. And we see that justification going on, and yes, it's confusing to us, but this was how they interpreted Jewish law. Just as we interpret Jewish law, they've interpreted Jewish law. You know, we ordain women. They think this is scandalous, and how dare you, you know, ordain women, you crazy people who think you're Jews. So, you know, we have applied the same rights of interpretations of Jewish tradition. We need to allow them the same rights to interpret Jewish tradition, even though we disagree about that.
Yes,
I agree with you, but I don't know what they see in Jewish tradition where they feel they have the right to endanger people by not getting vaccinations and by not observing distance and masks and all those things.
Rabbi, I've had my hand up, and I'm going to intercede because I know we're running out of time.
okay.
First of all, I think the parallels between what you presented today and what's actually happened in the United States, and the actions and the words of some of our leaders, it's just amazing. They're almost the same. The vocabulary is different, but even social distancing was in there. There should be a limited number of people in the temple, that kind of thing. And to the comments from Joe and others about the Orthodox, I want to remind everybody that I think you can say the Reform believed this, but when you talk about Orthodoxy, based on my own experience, having been brought up in a Orthodox synagogue, there's more than, I think, 60 or 70 different views or sects or something in Orthodoxy. I belonged to what was considered the modern Orthodox, and the brother of our rabbi was a distinguished scientist at UCLA, and I cannot remember any pronouncements that would limit access to modern health methods. I think we can't stereotype them all unless we identify this specific group. I'm not saying that anything you said or anyone else said was wrong. I'm just saying when you talk about Orthodoxy, you can't put them all in the same bag. That's my opinion.
No, very, very true, Harry. And I do want to reiterate that Orthodoxy is not monolithic, just as Reform is not monolithic, just as conservative is not monolithic, just as Judaism is not monolithic. We cannot say all Jews do X, Y, or Z. But certainly the far right Orthodox communities that have made the news during this pandemic with regards to what we would seem as careless behavior have given rise, especially when we see in Jewish tradition and Jewish law so much focus on the value and sanctity of life, especially when you have Maimonides, who's accepted, you know, clear across the spectrum as saying, you know, you cannot endanger another life. You cannot say, what concern is it of you what I do with my life? You know, Maimonides has written that. So when we come across those statements, it's a natural thing to give question. But you're absolutely correct. We should not blanket all of Orthodoxy. It is just those few communities who have, you know, sort of behaved in ways that we question, just as they question us about the way we behave. So, you know, asking questions is all part of learning. Unfortunately, right, I'm not equipped to answer those questions as to why they did that. And indeed, many other rabbis from those same spectrum of communities also questioned the decisions of some of those communities to behave the way they did. So even internally, within that spectrum of Orthodoxy, there is debate about what is appropriate behavior and what is not appropriate behavior during, especially
What's the
during
matter?
the pandemic.
Lily?
Alrighty, folks. I want to thank you all for joining us for our Tea on Tuesday. This session looking at a pandemic from over 150 years ago, bringing us full circle to our very own pandemic, where here we have implemented so many of the things that they did in 1848 as our way of maintaining our own personal safety. I hope that everyone continues to stay safe. Excuse me, we will meet again next Tuesday and gradually be working our way into a discussion about Judaism and some of the bioethical questions that come up with regards to the dying and heroic measures and removal of life support and some of these very heart-wrenching and real topics that Judaism has some guidance for us as well. I thank you all very much for joining us. Any last comments or questions or thoughts?
Yes, thank you so much, Rabbi. This
Yes,
was
thank you.
really fascinating to see that we've come so far and yet we haven't.
It
Well said.
was interesting.
That's human nature. Human nature doesn't
That's
change.
right, because people are still people.
Yeah.
Indeed. Indeed. There's nothing new under the sun, as we took a look at Ecclesiastes during our previous Tuesday at 2. Terrific, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us. I wish you a safe week. Wear your masks, wash your hands. We'll get through this. Bye.